Good news every week, and here's something on the 5G front. The news is that it's rather surprising, but the European Commission has now agreed to review the levels of accepted levels of radiation exposure, and to do so without reference to a body called ICNIRP, but rather to do it with reference to independent bodies. Independent bodies meaning bodies that aren't run by the telecommunications industry. ICNIRP, which is the International Commission for Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, is a private association based in Germany. It's not, in a sense, an official body. It's a private body, and almost all its members are compromised due to links with the telecommunications industry. The only reason ICNIRP has a degree of credibility is because it acts under the auspices of the WHO, the World Health Organization. Well, the WHO is itself a public-private partnership. So it's a body that, for example, the third largest contributor to the WHO is Bill Gates. So what we're talking about, this body, which in fact decides on the level of radiation which we can legally be exposed to, is a private body recognized by a public-private partnership, and the whole thing compromised with links to the telecommunications industry. So for those of us who've been involved in anti-5G, anti-4G, anti-3G activity, as I have for some time, this is actually, I can see this is quite significant. It doesn't, of course, mean that everything's going to change. At the moment, the tendency is for the limits to be pushed up all the time. That's part of in response to the 5G rollout. But at least now we can say that the reign of ICNIRP as a body of reference is over. So that, I think, is something important. ICNIRP came into being in the 70s, and it was run by the great charlatan Dr. Michael Rapaccioli. If there is one man who is responsible for the whole mobile phone rollout, which was carried out without any testing or any justification, it is Dr. Rapaccioli. He more or less did this single-handed. So since ICNIRP was set up, what they've done is they've systematically ignored all the very numerous studies which have come out showing the dangers inherent in mobile phone radiation. They've simply ignored them. And what they actually say is that this EM radiation, electromagnetic radiation, can only have a heating effect on the body. That means it has no biological effect. So, in other words, the limitations they put out are merely to stop your flesh from being overheated to exposure to mobile phone radiation. Of course, this is not the main problem. The main problem is that there are biological effects. An example of a biological effect of radiation is photosynthesis, the effect of the sun on plants. This is a biological effect, light being part of the electromagnetic spectrum. With regard to effects on people, they're fairly well known. Mobile phone radiation creates an oxidative stress effect. That's why it's so important to take vitamin C and other powerful antioxidants to protect yourself against it. I could go into that. You can go into that at any amount of length. There are any number of studies about the ill effects from mobile phone radiation, not just at 5G or 4G, but right from the start. What is interesting is that Eichner, not only did they ignore new studies that were coming out, they ignored a whole lot of old studies. So where did these old studies come from? In fact, a lot of them came from the Soviet Union, in fact. So in 1973, there was a symposium in Warsaw under the auspices of the WHO, which looked at all the known ill effects of EM radiation. And what you could see in the report, which is still available from that conference, is the massive amount of work that was done in the Soviet bloc to expose the dangers of this radiation. The point is, at that time, it was very easy to show that this radiation was dangerous, for the simple reason that almost no one was exposed to it. The only people who were exposed to it in the workplace, usually related with radar or other military technology. So you only had a small group of the population who were ever exposed to this stuff. And what the Russians did was of course, they did epidemiological studies comparing the health of people who were exposed to this radiation day in, day out in the workplace with the rest of the population, effectively, who weren't exposed to it at all. And it was perfectly clear then, they'd already coined the phrase radiation sickness to apply to people who were exposed to this radiation at work. There were already an enormous number of studies listing all the different symptoms. In fact, more or less everything that has been done was done then. The modern studies more or less just replicate the same Soviet studies. So we can say quite safely that by 1973, the WHO itself was perfectly aware of all the dangers from this stuff. What happened at the conference, of course, was that this was the height of the Cold War. The Americans weren't very keen on the the ill health effects of this stuff, because they were pushing ahead, of course, with new weaponry and new uses for this kind of technology. And these new uses have now culminated in the 5G technology, mass surveillance technology, possibly with a weaponized element, technology which can be used to control robots, can be used to control every element of daily life in the Internet of Things. So, but all this work was already being done. What is more, in the West, everyone knew about the ill effects of the radiation because of the work on radar in the war. Okay, just as the Soviets knew, in the West it was also known, but of course it was covered up here. And the 73 conference, therefore, is a Cold War conflict over the issue of whether this radiation is safe. Anyone who reads it objectively can see that the Russians won hands down. Okay, so what this tells us is that the whole mobile phone network was launched in the full knowledge of the harm it was going to do to the population. In the full knowledge. They didn't themselves conduct any studies, but the studies had already been conducted and they knew about them. So, you know, they're lying bastards. What else can you say? What else can you say? They're lying bastards. They knew the effect this technology was going to have, but they just went ahead with it anyway. Okay? They just went ahead with it anyway. So I don't know what that tells you about them. But
that was the New World Order.
That was the New World Order. They're on their way. They're well on their way by then.
Yes.
Okay. They've been around for a long time and they've been playing the same game. What's happening now is it's all coming to a head at once. It's all coming to a head now. The 5G is obviously, if 4G was kill, then 5G is overkill. I mean, this is just, they're going for the jugular now. So it's all coming to head now, but it's always been there. It's always been there in the public domain, and let's make sure we win this time. You could have looked back, actually. Yeah, you could have looked back in 1973. You could have looked back and said, "Oh, because anyone who read that would have thought, oh." In fact, I don't even know if there was anyone in that conference who seriously thought they were going to expose the entire population of the globe to this stuff at, exponentially higher and higher levels. I don't think there probably was, but that's what they've done. Okay.
Thank you.